Here we are at target 3A from our chapter 2 study guide. We're asked to identify the domain and range and then determine if the following is a function or not. Now, when we've talked about domain and range, we know that the domain is pretty much just your x's, whereas the range are our y's. And from this, then, we know that we have a bunch of different coordinates here, each one with an x and a y. So here's an xy. -2 represents the x, 7 is our y, and so on. And then from that, if we just had to list out the domain or the x's, we would end up then with 1, -2, 5, -4. For our range, again, those are just the y values. So in this case, we end up with our range being 6, 7, 6, 8. Now for the range, you don't necessarily have to repeat this second 6. It doesn't really matter too much. Now in looking and checking to see, is this a function or not? Well, we kind of go down the line with our different x values and see if we have any repeating x values. So what I mean by that, if we just look, for example, at this first value 1, looking down the line for our x values, we see that there are no other 1s over here. So then this first one would be okay. Then looking at -2, there's no other -2s at all in our domain, so he also checks out. Looking at the next value 5, there are no 5s. He checks out. -4, same thing. Now since there's no repeating values for x in the domain, we would have a function in this case. So this would be yes, this is a function. Now, you might be asking yourself, what would happen though if we did have a repeating value? So for example, instead of this 5, actually we'll go with this -4. If this -4 were instead +1, well, notice then how we have 1 being up here, and it's going to 6, but then the same x value, 1, would be going to 8. And unfortunately, 1 cannot do that. 1 has to go to either 6 or 8, but it can't go to both. It's kind of like the analogy we've used in class, where if you threw pepperonis into a machine, you should expect a pepperoni pizza and not a sausage pizza. It has to make up its mind. Likewise, we talked about how some classmates would, maybe if they could go anywhere in the world, such as maybe Europe. Okay, great. They want to go to Europe, but then at the same time, they might also want to go to California. That classmate can't go in both places. They have to kind of choose one. So that would be an example of a function. For every single input or our x value, we should have exactly one output or one y value. Now you might also think, well, what about here where we see that we have the same value 6? For the y values or the range, we don't really care as much if they actually have that repeat. It's really only the x ones that we care about if there is a repeat. Again though, that is our target 3A from our chapter 2 study guide.